It's time for the Full Press Hockey Podcast with Jim Biringer and Bruce Seaman.
Shoots! He scores!
And now, with a trip around the National Hockey League, here's Jim and Bruce.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Full Press Hockey Podcast. Please subscribe on YouTube. Follow along. Check it out. I'm your host, Jim Biringer, the voice of Full Press Hockey. I am joined by Edmonton Sportsnet reporter Gene Principe. It's a reunion here. We saw each other down at the Stanley Cup Final. He took some time out of his busy day to give us a quick hit during Game 2. Gene, welcome to the program.
Yeah, nice to see you again, Jim. It's weird because I'm not sure if it feels like a real long time ago I saw you at the Cup Final, or it doesn't seem that long ago. I'm somewhere sort of caught in between. Right now, it feels like a long time ago, even though it was late June when we saw each other for Game 7 and the end of the hockey year and the end of Florida's chase for a Stanley Cup and the continued chase for Edmonton to win another one. Yeah,
no, let's start there real quick. Before we get into all the off-season stuff that happened with the Edmonton Oilers, I want to go back to last season. You mentioned it, the Stanley Cup Final, heartbreak, Game 7, they lose. But it was really a culmination of what happened all year, the way they started, the way they rallied, the adversity they came through, and to get to that point and just get so close. It feels like this team's going to be motivated for next year.
Yeah, you mentioned the word adversity, and I heard that and synonyms of it all season long after a real rough start led to a coaching change. And they rattle off I don't know if you can just rattle off a 16-game winning streak, but they put together a winning streak that was tied for second longest in NHL history and made their way into the playoffs, faced some adversity, particularly in the second round against Vancouver, as they had to, fight off 2 elimination games and win in 7. And then, of course, falling 3-love to Florida in the Cup Final was staggering. It was like a Mike Tyson body shot back in the late 80s, mid-90s. A lot of people don't get up from those. Edmonton did, and, they were winning round after round. But, in the end, I'm not sure if there's any particular reason why they didn't win Game 7 other than, I thought Florida was really good, didn't make any mistakes, didn't cost themselves anything, and Edmonton, despite their best efforts and some really close calls to tie up the game at 2-2, just couldn't find that one goal that they needed from one of the great offensive teams, certainly this past season. So we move on, we move forward. What happened is in the rearview mirror, and now we look out the front mirror, front window, and kind of see what we always talk about a hangover. I don't know if there will be one. But we'll wait to see how they get started with camp and then into the regular season.
Yeah, you mentioned it, like you move forward, right? And look, I was always been a big, basketball guy too, even though hockey is my love. My team has been the San Antonio Spurs, and I go back to when they lost to the Miami Heat that one year when Duncan was on the bench. The next year, they just came out and they just was like, nope, that last year was supposed to be our year. We should have won it. They were motivated. They used that loss as their motivation, and then they just won the championship. I could see the Edmonton Oilers, and I know we'll get into the losses that they had on defense, and maybe this team isn't as good as it was, or maybe it's just as good as it was. But I feel like what they went through that entire playoff run is going to motivate them for next year.
I don't think there's any doubt. It was interesting, not this past playoffs, but the one before when they lost out to Vegas in 6 games, and Leon Draisaitl said cup or bust, and people took that in different ways. Some thought that's a lot of pressure to kind of basically say if you don't win the Stanley Cup, the season's a bust, but others looked at it as the ultimate motivation. And I think the window that they're in right now for Edmonton, with Leon, Connor, Zach Hyman, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Evan Bouchard, Stuart Skinner, it's a really good team. So it does kind of feel like cup or bust. It doesn't mean that not winning the cup is a total failure, but every team starts with the idea that they can win it, some realistically. And definitely Edmonton, along with Florida, and you might want to pick Dallas, the Rangers. I mean, there's going to be some teams that come back and are as strong as they were last year, maybe a bit stronger, and then others that might surprise us. But for sure, I haven't quite seen the odds yet, Jim, but I'm guessing that Edmonton is at the top of the heap, or will be once the odds come out for, who's your favorite to win the Stanley Cup, and the motivation of losing in 7, going all that way, and then really ending empty-handed, just kind of fuels the fire for them to say, we're so close, we need to keep pushing so we can get over the top.
Well, you mentioned the odds. I did looked at the way too early odds about maybe like in July, and Edmonton and Florida were up there as the top two teams to win the Stanley Cup and get back. So, I mean, there you go. And that was even before all the offer sheets and
Yeah.
now. And as you mentioned, Leon Draisaitl, their window, he signs that big 8-year extension, 112 million, a 14 million AAV. I mean, he played it so close to the vest. He said certain things in the media saying, "Hey, we need." My agent's going to take care of it. I want to be here, but, it's a business. It felt like what he said the other day was like it was Edmonton or it was no place else, just because he wants to win with Connor McDavid.
Yeah, Jim, you're right. I think that you kind of have to be prepared for maybe something unexpected, so that you don't kind of paint yourself into a corner by saying, "Oh yeah, for sure, I'm signing." I mean, even at the year-end press conference after the Game 7 loss and got back to Edmonton, I mean, he said everything but "I'm signing with Edmonton." You always want to leave yourself a sliver of opportunity, or maybe doubt, in case things don't quite go the way you expect. You know what you want. You think you know what the other party wants, but you got to make sure that it finds its way into an area that makes everybody comfortable. So when they leave the negotiating table, they go, "That was fair. That was fair." And I think he described the negotiations as respectful. And I'm not sure we often hear that when it comes to contracts. So I thought that told me that, listen, you're on one side, I'm on the other, but we want the same thing. So let's get this figured out. And they were able to. And I think where he landed was really where we expected, people throughout 13 and a half or 13 and a quarter or 13 3/4 or 14. I'm not sure it ever really got over 14. I think 14 seemed to be, at least in the public, the ceiling for him. And I don't know where it started in regards to the actual negotiations, if, Leon's camp came in over 14, or they just kind of decided that was a number. But that seemed to be the right number, give or take $500,000, which is a lot and isn't, depending on which way you look at it. When you're tight to the salary cap, $500,000 right now is a big deal. It's money that can and will be used elsewhere, and it sets the tone and the table for his buddy. A year from now, we might be doing this, talking about fill in the blank Connor McDavid instead of Leon Draisaitl. So I don't think in Edmonton there was ever any sort of angst or concern that this wouldn't happen. There was maybe some doubt as to what the number would be for AAV and what the number would be for years. I mean, eight's great. I mean, that is, I think, from Oiler fan standpoint, where you would want to be. I'm not sure anyone wanted a 4-year deal that would have had then a 32-year-old Leon Draisaitl, likely still at or near the top of his game, available again around the National Hockey League. Who knows what will happen in the next 4 years? 8 is a long-term commitment. That's back-to-back 8-year deals. It doesn't kick in until next year. So basically, it should take him to either right at the end of his career or virtually the end of his career once those 8 years are done. So, they are individuals, Leon and Connor, but it's almost like you can't say one without the other. So I think that will also be the case when it comes to signing a long-term deal for the captain in a year from now.
Yeah, I mean, Connor McDavid, I think everybody expects it for him to lock it up. I mean, if it doesn't happen during the season, this is just me speculating and me just throwing it out there. Okay, July 1st, 12 p.m. East Coast time, Edmonton Oilers say Connor McDavid, 8-year extension, fill in the blank, 16 million, whatever it is.
Yeah,
I have a feeling that's where it's going. But you mentioned like those two guys are so tight. But I wonder, you look at the Victor Arvidssons that came in, the Jeff Skinners, they kept, Adam Henrique, the Corey Perrys. The fact that guys want to play there, how much did that go into Draisaitl signing long term?
Well, I think that you have your own motivation on what you want to do, and you've spent a long time with an organization, and And really, if there's nothing wrong with it, you're happy, in his case, fiance, or in the case of others, your family's happy. I'm not sure. I understand we get sort of seduced by all these numbers and AAVs and terms and salary caps, but when these kids are growing up, they want to win a Stanley Cup. That's kind of what they play the sport. They get to be really good at it. They become special talents and players who get drafted, who get opportunities that, many of us wish we could have when we were young, playing whatever sport it might be. So I sometimes that kind of gets lost in there. That remember, they want to win the Stanley Cup, and if you're Leon Draisaitl, and if you even looked around the league, where do you have a better shot of winning? I don't know. You might be able to pluck a team or two out and say, well, they could have, but to do it with your best buddy, and to have a chance to do it in a city that you love and that has loved you back. I just felt like that is what started and continues for Leon. And then you see everybody else around you that says, I want to be there. I want to be there. Connor Brown, I think, signed for $1 million. He made $4 million last year, and I know he had a tough regular season, but he came on strong late in the regular season, had a very good playoff. So people like to win; they want to win, and winning also breeds success. And I just use Connor Brown for an example. So he signs a 1-year deal worth $1 million. He has a good year. They win the Stanley Cup. Now he can go back to whether it's Edmonton or potentially elsewhere, and now he's got more to negotiate with and bargain with. So Adam Henrique's been around, rookie in Jersey, in your area there, and he went to a Stanley Cup final, never won, has done it again. He wants to win. He's made a lot of money. He wants to make more, but he can make it and also have a shot at winning a Stanley Cup, which is, so many great players have had Hall of Fame careers, never even had a chance to win it or never won it. So I like the fact that this is a team that understands how close they are. And you can't always just bring the same band back. I remember Glenn Sather back when the Oilers were winning Stanley Cups 5 and 7 years. He always felt like coming off, even if it was a Stanley Cup year, that there was about a 20% change necessary for his team. So going on 20 players, you're talking about 4 players that will move, whether it's to go elsewhere, whether it's trade, whether it's retirement, and that's kind of what we're looking at. Again, here, you mentioned a couple of the big names that have arrived and some developing big names that are gone. And you wait to see if Chris Knobloch can pull it all together again and find some magic.
Yeah, no, you mentioned it. Some departures, obviously, Vinny Desharnais on the back end, but also the 2 big ones, the prospects you mentioned, Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg, St. Louis Blues. They give them the offer sheets each 2 years. Broberg around 4.5, and I believe Holloway around 2.2 million. And, strategically, that's a great move by the Blues. They knew what the Oilers were up against. The salary cap, you mentioned, $500,000 a year, $1 million there. Say the Oilers match those offer sheets. Well, is Leon getting his contract now? Like, what's it down the road? Because not only is McDavid, you have Bouchard. But talk about those departures there, because, those kids were prospects, are developing. Broberg, especially, we saw him in the final. He played so well. But again, you're paying for potential. Your window's now. It's a tough balance for the new general manager, Stan Bowman, and Jeff Jackson there.
Yeah, I think that offer sheets seem to be the NHL's dirty little secret.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about them, and then suddenly when they happen, and certainly Edmonton has some history. They once offered Thomas Vanek 7 years, $50 million that Buffalo matched, and then they offered, I think, 5 times 5.5, $21.5 million. We're in and around that area for Dustin Penner and the Ducks back then with Brian Burke. He did not match. So there is some history, but they just don't happen. Ryan Kessler, I remember that being a big offer. There are some, but every time they come up, everybody kind of, the hair on the back of their neck stands up, because it's like, what are they doing? It's in the CBA, and it is allowed. And so that's what St. Louis decided to do. I wasn't really sure what Edmonton was going to do. As Stan Bowman said, 4 options: sign both or match. Match neither, match Broberg and not Holloway, or vice versa. And they decided to go, with the option of not matching either. I think that the Oilers decided they didn't want another team setting their salary setup. And, Broberg especially, I think it was 453% raise. I
Yeah.
mean, I agree with you. He came out of nowhere almost to play so well in the playoffs and in the final, but that really skews things with lots of big contracts on the horizon, including Connor and, as you mentioned, and let's not forget Evan Bouchard, especially if he has another year like he had last year. That's a lot of money that will be tied up with those players, and so you gotta kind of pinch your pennies wherever you can. And in the end, I believe that if they really felt like those two, including Holloway, were necessary for them to win the cup, they would have done it. I mean, at this point, they'll do anything in this window that you described to win the Stanley Cup, but they can find other ways to do it and other players to do it. Interestingly enough, Broberg replaced Vinny Desharnais,
Mhm.
and they both end up going. Vinny to Vancouver on a nice sort of comfortable deal for a guy who really was making AHL money until most recently. So happy for him that worked out. Broberg and Holloway end up getting tainted a bit just because the offer, because they have to sign it. And, some fans go, well, why did they sign it? Well, because, Dylan was going to make twice as much money, and Philip was going to make, as you mentioned, more than 4 times the money. And I think Holloway was maybe more hoping that Edmonton would sign. He really did feel like he was part of the developing nucleus of the squad. Broberg still maybe felt like a bit of an outsider because things hadn't quite gone the way he expected once he was drafted in the first round by the Oilers. But he had a spot on the team. It's not like he didn't have a spot, but it's onward and forward. And that's just the way business gets done. They had to trade away Cody Ceci, who would be in the top when it comes to popular teammates within the room. But it's looking ahead to right now. I mean, Jeff Jackson, when he was hired, he goes, we want to win right now. And that's going to be the mantra, the motto, the theme for Edmonton, at least for the next 3 or 4 years, whether it's win another one right now or just let's win right now. That has to be the mindset as these players, in particular Connor and Leon, move from their late 20s into their early 30s.
Yeah, no, you mentioned Cody Ceci. I want to touch on him for a minute because he seems to be the popular player amongst the fans about all the negativity. But if you think about it, that's a guy you could just plug in your third pair. I know the pairings, in the Stanley Cup Final, a lot of criticism. Why is he playing with a certain player? This, that, and the other thing. We get it. But if you think about it, that's a steady NHL defenseman that's not on your team anymore.
I agree, Jim. I think every team in sports sometimes has, for lack of a better term, kind of a whipping boy that gets in the crosshairs of the fans and in social media nowadays. And no matter what he does, can't seem to get out of it. And no matter how steady he would play, and I would often kind of ask myself, especially because there were always rumors, and even at the deadline, I'm like, so what? How did Cody Ceci play today? Did he cost them any goals? Sometimes it'd be a yes, not just for him, but others. And a lot of times it was like, no, 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 no. And so I never quite understood that. And trading away Cody sort of made people believe that they were making room for Philip and or Dylan and matching those offer sheets. But no, it was a separate entity, a separate part of their business. And I think they decided they took their time, which, was kind of fun, built the drama, the tension from both teams and fans for both teams in the hockey world. They waited right till the end. I mean, the morning of, before announcing that they weren't matching those offers. So it's tough. You have to get rid of people. Sometimes you don't want to. I remember when Tyson Barrie was traded for Matthias Ekholm, the room was kind of down. They really loved Tyson, but they saw that Matthias was coming in and he gave them a chance to win a Stanley Cup. Cody is unfortunate because you also spend your own time trying to help with the team and trying to help get to that Stanley Cup, and you do that, and then you're so close, you don't get there. You hope you're going to get there, and then you're off to San Jose, which is rebuilding nicely. So I wish Cody nothing but the best of luck. A really nice guy to deal with, and he's like so many of us. We just try to go to work and do our job the best we can, and I thought he did it better than sometimes he got credit for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to take the time to mention Cody Ceci just because, I felt like, he just gets just unfairly criticized. Yeah. I mean, again, there's some guys, like you said, there's certain guys, certain players, every team has it, every fan base has it. they just lock in on this player and they just all they want to talk about is a negative. But I thought Cody Ceci at times played well. Other times, okay, maybe why is he out there? I believe the pairings like with Darnell Nurse and again, he's another guy that's unfairly criticized because of the money that he makes. And again, Evan Bouchard's contract's coming up. What does he get? Is he in the eights? Does he get close to Darnell Nurse's number? Because it feels like he's a better player all around than Darnell Nurse. Not to say taking anything away from Darnell Nurse, but it just feels like Evan Bouchard's bringing more to the table.
Yeah, I think that if Evan has the kind of year that he had, and he's, other than I remember one bobble against Vancouver that led to a goal, he had unbelievable year. I mean, he is a Norris Trophy candidate, and I know there's a guy in Colorado that's awesome, and there's a guy in Vancouver that's awesome, but I think Evan Bouchard's awesome, and they really slow played him early, the Oilers, and it's turned out to work out just almost maybe even better than they would have thought. I know the power play has a number of quarterbacks, but only one has a Bush bomb, and so he's kind of it along with the other guys that they have. But from the point, he's about as dangerous a player who plays defense or forward in the league, especially on the power play and at even strength. He's really developed and rounded out his game. And I mean, the number that kind of is tossed around is always around 10, with the idea, like you mentioned, that Connor would be around 16. Then you're at 14 for Leon. You're at about 10 for Evan. So many of the top defensemen are in that 9.25 range, which were contracts that were signed 2-3 years ago. Makar and Seth Jones and Zach Werenski and Nurse. So that was the going rate back then. What it will be after this year for Evan, I'm thinking high single digit, like a 9 or maybe inching into 10s, maybe not right off the bat. So you get your salary structure in place. And listen, Edmonton is in a good place because they've got, Nugent Hopkins and Zach Hyman and Evander Kane all in that 5.25, 5.5 range. So there's cost certainty there, but it'll be a dance. Yeah, there may be some players that make minimum more than you would like, but you have to have those kind of players as part of your salary structure, or whether it's someone with experience or a kid coming up that's on an entry level deal. I mean, those players are not as paramount as the ones at the top end, but you have to find them in order to fill in that salary structure and that salary cap so you can make it work. And we know the cap is going up after, COVID and post-COVID. It just sort of inched up. It's going to go up a little bit faster, which helps all teams, including ones like Edmonton that have this top end talent. If you spend $40 million or let's say almost 50 on Leon, Connor, Evan, and Darnell, that leaves you 40, 45, maybe 50 on the rest of the team.
Well, it was funny because I was talking to a colleague of ours the other day, and he was saying that if you can't win with Connor McDavid and Bouchard and Draisaitl making $60 million, then you shouldn't be playing, shouldn't be in the game anymore. Right. And I gotta laugh about that, and I'll tell you off air who it is, but it's really interesting to see what the Oilers are doing. The guys that they're bringing in on the minimum. Zach Hyman's contract has to be one of the best contracts in the NHL right now for the production that he is doing, because the fact that Connor McDavid has turned this guy into a 50-goal scorer, and I don't know if he'll be a consistent 50-goal scorer, but the fact that he put up 50 goals more last season is remarkable. I mean, Zach worked so hard on his game, but to just be there all the time for McDavid's passes, just unreal what he did last year.
Yeah, it's a position we all want to be in, but it's not an easy position because really there's one column that they look at to see if you're succeeding. Nobody cares about points, assists, plus minus. They look at the G, for goals to see how many's he got. And I think when you play with Connor, probably, depending on who you are and where you are in your experience, if you're a young player emerging, if you're in the 30s, I think high 20s, 30s, with the belief you're going to get higher, that's fine. If you're a player like Zach, who has just evolved and gone from a 20 to a 30 to a 40 to now a 54 goal scorer. For sure, people will be looking for something like that. I don't think that Zach has to score 50 plus again this year, but I think his own minimum would be 40 plus, somewhere in there, in the 40, 45. Maybe there's a few more goals scored by Jeff Skinner or Arvidsson, or so it doesn't have to be. But at the same time, Jim, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes back-to-back 50-goal seasons. I don't think McDavid's getting worse. Maybe he scores, more goals and has less assists because he had 100 last year. So that might skew things. Maybe Zach has 10 or 12 more assists and 10 or 12 less goals. But at the end of it, Connor's still going to be 140, 150 point player in that vicinity. And those around him will put together the kind of numbers that they did this past year. Leon again will be 40, 50, 100 plus point player. So there's lots to go around offensively, especially with the additions that they put on this team that I think could have, 30 goal seasons, which nowadays those are tough to find as well. So Zach, and listen, bottom line and the last line is Zach works as hard, if not harder, than any player in the NHL or any person in any profession. So him getting to that kind of success, I don't think anyone. It's not all about Connor. It is nice to be alongside Connor, but not everybody's put up. In fact, nobody has put up 54 goals in any of the seasons that Connor McDavid's had wingers since he got to the NHL. So a lot of credit to Zach for being able to do that as well.
No, 100%. I agree with you on that. And, you mentioned Evander Kane before, too, and there's some speculation that he could potentially not start the season with the team. Obviously the injury, surgery potential. Maybe he goes on LTIR, opens up some more cap space. And again, that brings us back to the big point about the offer sheets and cap space down the line, accruing the cap space necessary to find potentially if there's a weakness on this team at the trade deadline. If Evander does go on, when could we potentially see him down the road in the season?
Yeah, interesting. Evander's set up shop here. In fact, he just recently got proposed and is now another Oiler that is in that engagement period. Connor was there, got married. Leon's there now. He'll get married. And Evander, I mean, they have a beautiful family already, Evander. And so now they're going to make it more official somewhere down the line. They missed Evander last year. Yeah, he played, but he didn't play at the end. And the year before that, he had 13 goals, or 2 years before that when they made it to the conference final against Colorado. He's a prototypical player that you definitely want in the playoffs. I don't worry as much about his numbers during the year, whether it's 31 or 28 or 24 or 34, give or take a few goals. I'm not at all concerned about that. It's more about April, May, and June. And I think, we're going to see here when camp gets started. We've heard so many different stories about Evander and surgery and when will he be ready, LTIR, salary cap relief, having more available. So I'll be curious. My belief is that it would be a couple of months if and when this surgery happens. Because I don't, unless I missed it, he hasn't had a surgery. And Evander on Instagram is a very busy man. So if I've seen him with his kids, I've seen him on holidays, I've seen him golfing. I haven't seen him, laid up because of a surgery. So I don't know where this is going and whether they'll just hang tight until the beginning of the year when he's sort of back at the office, and whether the plan is for him once camp gets started, just to that be sort of something they do right away, whether he's feeling better and they feel like maybe he can try to see where it goes. But they need a healthy Evander Kane, whatever way they do it, whatever way is best to do it, because, this team would suggest that it'll be in the playoffs again. And if and when they are, they're going to need him because he is really, X factor may not be the right way to say it because everybody knows Evander Kane and the style he plays, but the amount of goals that he can score, the physical presence that he has, for him to be healthy or as close to healthy as playoff players get, which would be much different than last playoffs, would be a huge bonus for Edmonton.
No, yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, you saw it in the final. You saw it throughout the playoff run. If they had a healthy Evander Kane, I'm not saying they would have won the Stanley Cup, but I think that series against Florida is a little bit differently,
Yeah.
especially along the boards, because we know how physical Evander Kane can be, and especially in the net front presence. That's a lot of his game now. Is just right in front of the net, physical, big body, hard to move. Maybe they win some of those puck battles in Game 7 and win, and maybe a puck goes in the net or not. You don't know. Again,
Yeah.
he wasn't healthy. He didn't play. It's unfortunate, but he's been definitely everything Edmonton has needed, along with like guys like Corey Perry too. And Stuart Skinner played great, by the way, in the playoffs as well. Even though he's benched, and they had to go to their backup. He went through a lot of adversity. Do you think Skinner, is that still an area of weakness, concern for the Oilers, or is there another like one big question mark for the Edmonton Oilers heading into this season?
I think goaltending is one of those areas, Jim, that always seems to be a concern. If you don't have a guy that is, Marty Brodeur or Marc-Andre Fleury, or back in the day, Grant Fuhr, or, I look at Jordan Binnington, and I covered the 2019 Stanley Cup, and, wins the Stanley Cup, and he was awesome. And last year he came back, but in between there were questions, can he still do it? And so I think Stewart, no fault of his own. And I guess just, because they didn't win the Stanley Cup, there's always like, well, he hasn't won a cup. Well, there aren't many goalies that have won cups, and some, like Marc-Andre Fleury, have won 3 of them. And where do you find them? I mean, you look around waiting for Thatcher Demko to return. Jacob Markstrom's gone out of Calgary. So the goalie position, when I was growing up, it seemed more solidified. You had one guy who played 65, 70, 62 games, whatever it was, the amount of games. Then you had a backup, clear backup. And in the playoffs, you went with your guy no matter what. Well, Edmonton, listen, gutsy.
Oh,
I tell you, first to take him out, and maybe even gutsier. I don't know which one was gutsier, but both were. And Stewart came in and played great. And, it was interesting. That final game, the second goal by Fleury,
yeah.
people like, Skinner. I'm like, I found that a weird arguing point. This guy's played all these games. You're into the final. It's Game 7, and he's allowed 2 goals. But put your hand up if you're an Oiler fan who would have said, I'll take 2 goals allowed in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, because I think our team will score 3. Put me in as part of so I found it funny that there was so much sort of critique of that goal. Great goal, not great goal. The way it was played, it's 2-1. Like it's 2-1. I mean, it was 2/3 of the game basically to go. But I think Stewart's going to be fine. With young goalies, there's maybe the peaks and valleys are a little more defined than someone who's a 10-year vet, where the peak and the valley are just closer together. But that doesn't mean that I think he's going to go into a valley and can't play, and far from it. And it told me a lot about Stewart, who's very mature young man. He'll be 26 November 1st. I have a son who's basically the same age as him, and I always think of him and go, I wonder what kind of pressure my son could handle, and whether he could handle what Stewart goes through as a number 1 goalie in a hockey town that loves you and then sometimes doesn't love you. So I think Stewart will be fine. Calvin Pickard, wonderful story, kind of lost in the minors, buried in the minors for years, and comes up, and he really gave him a chance. Without him, who knows if they get through Vancouver and eventually make it all the way into the Stanley Cup Final in Game 7. So I don't have an issue with their goaltending. Obviously on defense, they've got to fill some spots, but I think that they've done that with the deal. The kid, actually, Ty Emerson, he used to play out east, and I'm kind of curious to watch him. I've heard his name. I've kind of seen him a little bit, but I haven't really watched him enough to have an opinion on him. So, and then you mentioned a couple vets like Arvidsson and Skinner. I think they're going to be energized to be in cities from where they had maybe a chance to win a Stanley Cup. More Arvidsson than Skinner, but come here really thinking at this point in their careers, this is it. I mean, this can't see them getting a better shot than they've got right now. And that is going back to where we started, a motivation that you may not think you need, but now you know you have.
Yeah, especially Jeff Skinner, who is looking to get to the playoffs for the first time in his career, which is
a long time.
I mean, to just think about that, I'm like, I thought he did it in Carolina. And you look at it, he's like, oh, no, he didn't. He wasn't there. Then be in Buffalo. But I think he's a great addition. Arvidsson, again, the motivation, like you said. Can't wait to watch the Edmonton Oilers. I think, right now, they're the team to beat to me in the Western Conference. I don't see anybody else there are teams that can match them, no doubt.
Yeah.
But if you're telling me today who I think is going to get back to the Stanley Cup Final from the West, I would have to say I can't, put anybody ahead of the Edmonton Oilers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm born and raised in Edmonton and have covered the Oilers for 25 years. So for me to say Edmonton, your viewers are going to, oh, really? Mm-hmm. Shocking. But yeah, and I think Dallas has a very good team, and Colorado's going to have another good team, and Vegas is always, a challenge, and Winnipeg's always kind of, in that vicinity, and looks like it's not easy. I'm not suggesting it's going to be, 3-4 game sweeps to get into the Cup Final again, but yeah, coming off of what they've done, coming off who they just signed and that's settled, and what they've done in the offseason, I think that they are a Western Conference favorite. In February, I might say, geez, right alongside them is blank or blank. And there are teams that will be alongside them. I mentioned them. We'll wait to see how much of a challenge it'll be for the eventual Western Conference champion. But right now, no puck has dropped. No camp has started. Edmonton looks to be right there, if not the team to beat, one of.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to watch it. Can't wait. Hockey's right around the corner, Gene. It's been a pleasure here on the Full Press Hockey Podcast to have you on, a little Stanley Cup Final reunion, talking some Edmonton Oilers. I appreciate your time today, taking some time out from your busy day. I know you always have a busy one, so I appreciate you taking the time out.
Yeah, no problem, pal. That was a fun time in Florida in the Cup Final. Hope to see you there, whether it's Florida, but more importantly, there as in the Cup Final again this year.
Absolutely. I can't wait to see you again, guys. Full Press Hockey Podcast, again, up on YouTube. Follow, like, subscribe, leave your comments. Also up on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as at Full Press NHL on Twitter as well. I'm Jim Biringer, Gene Principe, Edmonton Oilers reporter from Sportsnet. Guys, take care and enjoy the news.
Barry Trotz, Nashville Predators, making sure you're listening to Full Press Hockey Podcast.